Hey, welcome to the first episode of Talk on Things and Stuff. Now, what this show is intended to be is a live discussion about topics that are relevant in Mormonism today. It's been a long time coming, I think, till the technology existed where you could kind of do a call-in show like this, and I'm kind of been planning to do something like this for a while, but I end up sabotaging myself by going overboard in planning, and I decided to just kind of kick myself in the pants and get started and do it. So that is the plan for today. So I'm hoping that all of the planning that I went into beforehand helped this actually go off without a hitch, and that everybody can hear me, and that the video is going all right. And we will just get started. So what is this show intended to be about? Who is the intended audience? Well, I'm hoping that people who are both former Mormons as well as active believing Mormons would find some value in the type of discussion that we could have here. Part of the show will include taking calls from viewers, as well as if you're watching this on Facebook or YouTube, you can actually enter comments in there and we'll be able to interact with you through the comment section as well. The nature of what we could cover in these discussions includes anything from church history to some of the stuff that you've seen on the Thinker of Thoughts YouTube channel, which would include discussions about the types of psychological manipulation or undue influence that you may see in various different types of groups. And it could also be anything from, how do you navigate a faith crisis, and what are some ideas for ways that we can preserve the relationships that are meaningful to us while we go through the process of trying to kind of take a new perspective on the faith and your journey, and kind of trying to figure out where you go from here once you come to a new perspective on Mormonism. As well as if you're having difficulties with family or anything like that. I've been trying to convince some of my own family to take part in these discussions, and it's possible one of them may call in. I don't know, but we'll see how this goes. This is kind of a pilot episode because there's a lot of technical stuff that I've been trying to get hammered down, but I have a couple of things that I want to cover before we actually start taking calls, and they're kind of just to get stuff out of the way. So one of the first questions that I wanted to make sure I addressed was if you are familiar with the media that I've put out before, it started with a blog called Thoughts on Things and Stuff. And I chose that name because it kind of rolls off the tongue pretty easily, and I didn't want it to be pinned down to just issues of Mormonism when I first created it. That ended up being a lot of what I discussed. But I think because it doesn't specifically identify something as Mormon or ex-Mormon, there were people actually stumbled on it and were willing to read some of the material there. And then a few years ago, I transitioned to create a YouTube channel to do some video content. And I think that's probably had a larger reach than the blog itself. And that's been in conjunction with Facebook. But one of the comments that comes up a lot is, well, why do you call yourself Thinker of Thoughts? That's really arrogant. You think you're really smart. And I just wanted to kind of describe why that happened. So number one, when I went to create the YouTube page, they would not let me use the phrase Thoughts on Things and Stuff. It was too long, but I could get Thinker of Thoughts in there. And the concept for Thinker of Thoughts is not that you have a big brain or anything like that. It's really just a description of my own evolution. I went through almost 40 years of my life as a faithful, believing member of the church. And one of the things that I struggled with was the fact that if I wanted to know what was right on any of the moral issues of the day, that process usually for me involved, well, what did the brethren say? And then I'd have to look and see what statements or decrees the brethren had made about any significant moral issue. And then I had to make sure that my own perspective and my own rhetoric in discussing with people matched what the brethren said. And so I didn't realize what I was doing at the time, but I was really surrendering my conscience to the men in Salt Lake City. I believed that that was a valid choice because these men had a special connection to God, and they were the moral authority in my life. And it was really through the study of church history that I realized that that is a kind of It's an easy way to answer some of the difficult questions in life, but it can really lead you down some troubling paths. And when you study church history, you can see many examples of that sort of danger happening with people surrendering their conscience. Anything from Mountain Meadows Massacre to the way that for over a century, Mormons felt justified in thinking about and treating their fellow brethren who were black. And we see that even happening today. So Thinker of Thoughts was really something that should describe anybody who is going through this process of rediscovering or initially discovering yourself, your own conscience, your own thought processes, as you awaken to the reality that you can't simply rely on the people in Salt Lake City to tell you how to view things. And you've got to start formulating your own moral foundation so that you can figure out what is right and wrong for yourself, and so that you can stand up for and defend it on terms that are meaningful to you because they come from within you and are not simply borrowed from somebody else. So that's the issue of what I think of thoughts. Now, I'm hopeful that as we go through different episodes of the show, that we'll be able to come up with some fun segments, which are just little brief vignettes about certain issues and topics. And if you have one that you'd like to see addressed in the future, then please add it to the comments, and we can see what we can do in the future. One that comes up quite frequently in people who leave high-demand religions is something that I want to do as a segment of just like, how do you respond to some of these common things that we hear when we start talking to our family members about our faith crisis? And so if you're like me, and like many people, one of the things that you will have heard is you left because you wanted to sin. And the odd thing is that if you go to the Reddit forum for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, if you go to the Reddit forum for ex-Muslim people, you'll find that they actually have the same question asked of them from their believing family members when they decide to leave. And when you read and see the type of posts that the type of questions that they get, it really gives you something to ponder. So one of the things, I'm a member of an ex-Jehovah's Witness Facebook group, and one of the things that comes up very frequently is somebody will take a picture of usually an ornate birthday cake that seems very childish, and yet they're a grown adult, and they're really going out of their way to really celebrate the birthday cake. And to us as Mormons, that just seems like nothing out of the ordinary. You're celebrating your birthday, that's not a big deal. But it's actually a very liberating thing for former Jehovah's Witnesses, because part of their moral framework, the way that they believed that they were pleasing Jehovah and showing their faith to Jehovah, was to follow the certain restrictions and guidelines that they were placed under by the leaders of the Jehovah's Witness organization. And one of those was that they do not celebrate birthdays. And so somebody who grew up in the Jehovah's Witness faith decides to leave after they learn for themselves the history of the group and the nature of the fear-mongering and other psychological manipulations that have kept them bound. They leave, and then they start to actually discover the world for themselves. And some of the things that they previously were told displeased Jehovah or brought them out of good standing with God, they discovered did not actually carry any sort of penalty and were actually something that was a great part of the celebration of life that they were discovering afterwards. And so it is not uncommon for former Jehovah's Witnesses to have family members see them do things like celebrate their birthday, celebrate Thanksgiving, vote, go to college, those sorts of things that as Mormons we wouldn't see as any sort of moral transgression, but they point to them and say, look, you left because you wanted to sin. And it's kind of an experience that you have two people on different sides of the glass. If you're thinking of, the fish who the entire world that they know is the glass bowl that they live in, and it's only when you go out that you realize that there's a world outside of that. But for a Jehovah's Witness, it may be celebrating a birthday, going to college, or voting. For a former Muslim, it may be something as simple as eating bacon or having a pet dog. For a Mormon, it may be something like enjoying coffee or drinking tea or choosing your own underwear. Each one of these different faiths have what I call kind of proprietary moral boundaries. And this is where there are moral prescriptions given by the faith, powered by the notion that this is how you please God or this is how you displease God. And some of them are universal. So when we talk about be kind to one another, don't murder, don't steal, don't rape, those are universal moral principles. And so you'll find that generally all of these different faiths have them. It's really when you look at the proprietary things, the things that there seems to be no moral framework to describe why doing certain things is evil or immoral, other than a man claiming to speak for God says so. And so if you have family members that are telling you, you left because you wanted to sin, that can be the opening line to a discussion that is fraught with argument and accusation. And I find that it's really helpful to just talk and compare what is considered sin in other religions and other faiths and why those are considered that way. And then just realize that in Mormonism, it's okay once you realize that the men claiming to speak for God do not actually speak for God, and that they're simply interpreting their own biases and what has been handed to them as the word of God and then conveying it onto you. It's okay to step up outside of that and then discover the world and discover what your own standards and boundaries are. Now, there is an issue with people that are former Mormons or even former Jehovah's Witnesses or former Muslims who, in the process of discovering what their new standards are, find themselves in trouble. And many times this is because a lot of the experiences that normal people go through in adolescence, where they really discover themselves and they figure out what their position is related to alcohol, related to different things that for Mormons are absolutely prohibited. Normal people in their adolescence will learn a lot of things about proper boundaries, and people kind of instruct them at that time. That's the time that you learn, and people kind of expect it. But when you've gone through your entire middle life as a Mormon and you've never had the ability to go through the process of learning those boundaries, frequently people go overboard. And it's really, I think, becoming more common in the social support networks of former Mormons for people to be more cautious and more supportive in helping people learn those boundaries in a safe way that doesn't end up getting them in trouble. Because the other side of that is that if you do get in trouble, if you do find that you've gotten in a position that's difficult as a result of doing things that are restricted by Mormonism, that the people in the faith will look at your life and they'll say, see, this is what happens when you leave the faith. And it turns into a false equivalence of if you go on if you get drunk and you fall down and you chip a tooth or some other terrible thing happens to you, or you end up in a divorce or something like that, people will say this is the penalty for leaving God's true religion. And that happens in Jehovah's Witnesses. It happens in Muslims. It's a very common trope that you'll see for people leaving. But the fact is that, bad things happen both in and out of the church. And it's really good for us to live our lives based on things that are real and things that are actual. And in some cases, they'll carry more risk, but you are in a better position to deal with those if you're not bound by false moral proprietary boundaries. Anyway, okay, upcoming things. In the next few weeks, there's a couple of things that I'm involved in that you guys may take a look for. If you're not already familiar, there's a series called The Three Apostates that I do with Lloyd Evans and Chris Shelton. Lloyd is a former Jehovah's Witness activist, and Chris Shelton is a former Scientologist. And it's the episodes you can be found on Chris Shelton's YouTube channel, and they are usually a discussion that is a comparison between these three different religions about how certain things that keep people bound to those religions is unique in each one and things that they carry in common. And so I encourage you to check that out. This Saturday, we're going to be recording an episode talking about how fear is used to keep people in the respective religions of Jehovah's Witnesses and Scientology. And so that is a theme called phobia induction that we'll kind of compare notes and see what we have. So that's coming up on Saturday. And I think that's everything that I wanted to cover. Let's see what else we have going on. There's been a few comments on, looks like YouTube, and I think what we're going to go ahead and do is open up phones. What I'm going to ask you to do is there's going to be a phone number that is put up on the screen shortly, and you're welcome to call if you have a question or if you just would like to talk about your experience. We're going to try to keep each call to around between 5 and 7 minutes just so that we can talk to as many people as possible. Anyone who knows me knows that I have a hard time being short and concise, so we'll just kind of figure out how that goes. So let me go ahead and unmute that, and then all right, so you can see the phone number up on the screen. If you want to, if you're interested in calling, you can stay anonymous or you can provide your name. And I believe if this works right, then when you call, people will be able to hear your voice. So just be aware that your voice will be part of this. And while we're waiting for a call, let's take a look at any comments that we have. Jeff Price says, I guess I'm a thinker of thoughts. That's right. Everybody is. You should be anyway. That's one of the things that is beautiful about going through the process of faith transition, is it really produces a lot of growth, I think, once you start to realize that you have to figure things out for yourself. And I think it gives you a more strong foundation for a lot of life's problems. Okay, so if you end up calling, the phone number again is 210. I'm going to reset that. 210-422-2222. So you just type in 210, then the number 4, then just keep hitting the 2 button until it stops. And you'll get a call. And it may be that we don't get any callers, and that's okay. If my brother is watching, maybe he can call and give me all of the criticisms that he's just so fond of giving me. All right, Brian Harrison is saying, I didn't hear what the subject is. Brian, the subject right now is really just open mic. If anyone has any particular question, if you have something that you'd like to say about the recent disclosure that there is a investment fund worth over $124 billion that was leaked to the media. If you listen to D. Michael Quinn talk with the Salt Lake Tribune in Mormon land, you'll hear that he believes that it's actually much more, and we're just seeing a corner of the church's wealth. But that could be something that you want to talk about. This is the awkward moment where I don't really have anything planned, and we're hoping that somebody is willing to call and just talk about anything. But it could be that it's totally a dud. Let's see here. Other comments. All right, while we wait for a call, the process, if you the YouTube channel, you'll see that there are a number of different videos that start with some unrelated media, and then, oh, hold on, we've got a call. Let's see. Hello, you're online with Talk on Things and Stuff.
Hey, well, first of all, I would like to say thank you for all of the good work that you do. You're a very smart person and have done a lot for Mormonism. But I guess my question is, I'm not a Mormon, but I follow the church very closely. And I'm curious, do you think that it's a good idea for the church to be promoting Joseph's first vision this year, considering it kind of opens up a can of worms with many members probably for the first time ever realizing that there are multiple conflicting versions of the first vision that I think even more importantly, were never discussed or never came to light until at least 10 years after he had them. And I'll just go back online and listen to your thoughts on this. Yeah, you're the thoughts and things guy.
Yeah. Okay, so I appreciate the call. The question is it a good idea for the church to be covering the first vision this year, given that the issues with the first vision have caused a lot of people to have a faith crisis? Specifically because when you really dig down and look at the details between the different accounts, there are inconsistencies that seem to make it look like it may have been a post hoc fiction created to inspire faith in people. And again, it seems to become more fantastic each time. I think the church really is not going to have a problem focusing on the first vision at their bicentennial. I mean, it is a foundational story in the mythology of the gospel that is near and dear to Mormonism. That is something that I'm just going to mute it before we get the next thing. That's something that they've already laid the groundwork for how to examine this issue. And we've had a face-to-face or a session. I'm going to go ahead and mute it while we finish this, and we'll just hold on. All right. Okay. So we've already had kind of a session where they've said, listen, we have multiple accounts of something. It's going to be different because he's giving the story different to different audiences. And so there's really nothing wrong with that. If you were telling a story of something that happened to you to different audiences, it would be different each time. There might be some details that you tell one audience that you may not say the same way to another audience. And so I think faithful members are given a way to understand it. The differences in the first vision account are not really something that when I try to explain to people why I have an issue with the church, they're really not high up on the list, because I think a lot of people will dismiss a lot of those details because they're years after the fact, and it is different audiences, and in some cases you're looking at third-person accounts, so you don't know exactly what Joseph himself said. I think I felt that way until I heard Radio Free Mormon's discussion of the first vision, and he laid out several different examples, one of which included the differences of the first vision narrative that I think were very important. And that is, there are multiple instances in the life of Joseph Smith where he took something that he created himself. It was created in his own mind, and he gave us a glimpse into that in a sermon that he may have said or something that he may have written, where he's saying it from himself of his own strength. And in the first vision, that is, when you look at the first vision account, the 1831 that was hidden away in his journal, he talks about how he himself had come to the determination that none of the other churches were true. And if you were talking about any other religious figure in any other faith, where you hear that they're talking with their buddies and friends and they say something, and then the next week they claim to channel God and to speak for God, and suddenly God is saying the thing that they were just talking with their buddies the other day saying they thought of themselves, then I think if we saw that happen in some other religious cult or something like that, you would say, well, clearly this is a man who's creating theology, creating things himself, and then trying to pass it off as the word of God when he stands in that seat and proclaims what he says is the word of God. So when we see different accounts of Joseph Smith's first vision, the earliest of which in his own hand has him saying he had come to the determination that all the other churches were false himself, and then later he has God himself telling Joseph that he should not follow any other churches because they're all false, that is a big red flag. And then when you look and dive into the history of the church, you'll see that there are other examples where things that seem to be self-serving for Joseph, or that he thought of himself, end up coming out as the word of God later. And I'll refer you to Radio Free Mormon's talk on that because it's quite good. All right, we've got another call. Let's see what we can do. All right, I think I just missed it. So if you call, just call back. I think I'm excited to have the church talk about the first vision because it just gives you an opportunity to discuss early church history with faithful members. All right, we got a call. Let's see here. Boop. Hello, you're online with Talk on Things and Stuff.
Hello, my name is Euro. I just made a comment about some of the topics that you mentioned. I love your videos. Everything that you posted, I read it and watched it. But I want to know the reason of why the Mormon apostles, they don't really open up. They don't, they have all the access. They have all the information that Sandra Tanner has. All that information is available to them. Do they really believe in all that stuff, or it's a lot of money that they just don't want to give up? Or what are the thoughts? Like, are there any videos that I can go on and just see why they just don't open up?
I think this question comes up a lot. The question of, do the brethren actually believe, or do they know that there are all these problems that absolutely impeach the early claims of Joseph Smith and the church? And the way that I look at it is that, number one, we see them as church members, as apostles. And I know when I grew up, even into my middle-aged adulthood, I saw the brethren as religious figures, and ministering is what they did. And it's really only after I stepped away and I realized, wait a second, these are executive board members of a multi-billion-dollar corporation more than anything else. And so that aspect of their position, I think, has a great deal of influence. But beyond that, you'll hear people like Ballard and like Holland and several of the others talk about how they have had former missionaries, people in their lives come to them with some difficult church history questions, and that they've gone and studied them. And as you say, they do have access to the church vaults if they want to go and see things. And in some cases, I'm thinking of Ballard in particular, he's given this story of a missionary who came to him with all these questions, and he said, okay, I'm going to go and find the answers to these questions, but I've got something for you to do. I need you to read the Book of Mormon. And so then a couple of months later, he meets with the guy again, and the guy says, Elder Ballard, I'm okay. I read the Book of Mormon. I don't have any more questions. And then Elder Ballard is, well, sit your butt down. I went and I found the answer to these questions, and I'm going to tell them to you. Now, Ballard repeats that, and Dallin Oaks repeats Ballard's story, but they never actually tell us what those answers are or what those questions were. But the fact that these men, as they raised in the rank in the church, have been confronted with these questions before, and you know that they have because we have so many stories. Tom Phillips, everybody that has come out, they're documenting that they are writing to the general authorities and asking them the questions. So the general authorities know that these questions are being asked. And I believe Grant Palmer, he claims that he met with a general authority who says that the 12 realized shortly after their call to the apostleship that the foundation of the church is not what it claims to be. But by then, they take an approach that the church does a lot of good. They are in relatively comfortable seats, and they have a lot of people looking up to them, and they can do more good in the world by going with it and trying to be good than anything else. But we've seen that carries a toll when we see the type of doctrine that these people continue to espouse and impose on people far beyond when society moves beyond it. We saw it on racism, we've seen it on sexism, we've seen it on the issue with LGBT people. So,
well, like even when you just posted, I remember like one of the best, I would say, videos that you have uploaded is the video where Elder Holland has an interview with one of the journalists.
Yeah.
And I saw his body language and how he he's like, he just said, well, I gave my life to this church, you know, but he's not like acting like an apostle of, true apostle of God. You would just say, you will explain, you would just, it's something that, so to me, it's like, why would they continue on with this? Why don't they just open up and be honest with people? They just claim and go and tell people, be honest with people, do all that stuff. Why they just don't open up? There's so much information. It took me about 5 years. I went to BYU. I went on a mission. I've done, and then I didn't even believe it. That's why I studied for so long, just to be sure.
Yeah.
And all confirms that it's just so many problems, and they don't. It's just like it upsets me that they don't. They don't really open up. They don't really say the truth.
Yeah. And every single one of the brethren at the very top have gone through an extreme process of vetting and filtering. And if at any point along their careers, when they were bishops, stake presidents, mission presidents, 70s, at every one of these points, they could have at some point allowed their conscience to override their submission to dogma and authority, but they didn't. They continued to be company men, and that got them further and further. So by the time that they are apostles, they've already committed so much of their life and their worldview to the church that to go back now, I think, would open them up to criticism of being hypocrites. And I'm hopeful, as you're alluding to, that one day we will have somebody in the quorum of the 12 apostles who actually decides to break rank and become honest with what they know to be true about the dealings of the church. The Jehovah's Witness had somebody who joined their highest authority body. It's the governing body of the Jehovah's Witness. It's like 8 men. Somebody went up and got to that level in their organization, the same level that our apostles do. And they realized while they were in that position that the claims of the church were false. And they actually left, and they wrote a book explaining why they did. And that book had a very deep impact on a lot of faithful Jehovah's Witnesses. But you see now the Jehovah's Witness organization still exists. Even if we do have an apostle that ends up doing this and becoming open with it, there'll be a price to pay in terms of some people will lose their level of belief in the church, but there will be plenty of other people who will continue to believe in the church and continue to give their life to the church. So I appreciate the call.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. All right. So let's see if we can get another caller. While we're waiting for that, I had the opportunity yesterday to watch. Oh, okay. Well, hey, we'll go there. I don't even have to fill the time. Hello, you're at Talk on Things and Stuff.
Hey, man. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure. What's on your mind?
So my crazy family, they're on my mind. Like, my family is, they're not crazy, actually. They're incredibly smart. Like, perfect ACT, university professor. But I'm like the first one that has started challenging this stuff. And I'm challenging it pretty hard. But, like, and I read online that, like, everyone's advice is don't, like, you can't help them see. You can't help them see. And it drives me crazy because I really, really care about them. Like, quick example. I'm talking to my dad, and he's talking about the Book of Abraham. I'm like, Dad, on the church website, you can just look it up. You can say, they really say they admit this has nothing to do with Abraham. Like, he was off on that. Does that not bother you? And he says, yeah, but there's some things in the book you need to understand that Joseph just, that he got right that he couldn't have known otherwise. So he had to have been connected with God. And then I listened to Radio Free Mormon's awesome podcast talking about a few of those things. And I write him like, hey, Dad, just trying to be like, calm. I'm like, are these some of the things that, like, you were referencing, like some of these points? And then he says, well, yeah, those are some of the things, but I think there's other things too. And then I have the conversation, and he's like, we should study it together. We should keep looking through it together. And I say, well, Dad, typically for me, if you were to say, hey, there's 20 things in this book that you couldn't write out, but then I show you evidence, and I'm like, 15 of them now, they're gone. Now there's only 5 left. You'll spend the rest of your life looking for those 5. But my tendency is to say, like, if 15 are off, the other 5 are likely going to be the same. But he's like, I don't know about that, because he just wants to stay. He just doesn't want to see with how intelligent he is. And I can have a conversation about physics or anything else, and he'll follow, of course, right along. But when it comes to this, he just wants to protect his belief system. And so I guess I'm just wanting your advice or experience with strategies. Like the best, and maybe really the best strategy is just, be happy, be their friend, and not really push anything. It just drives me crazy.
Well, it sounds like to start with, he's talking to you and he's sharing his thoughts about things, and a lot of people don't have the benefit of that, where they won't
Yeah, that's true.
even engage on any of these issues. And I can't really talk from any degree of authority on how to open up the minds of your family members on that. I've been probably doing this since 2013, and I think my family members are all much more devoted and faithful to the gospel at the start of it, because maybe in part because I've brought up these issues that has kind of driven them to study more and find ways to believe. I think a lot of it is just when we go through the process of feeling like we've been lied to and finding out all of the different troubles, and it's the rabbit hole that you just go down, and there's so much. Once that switch gets flipped, where you allow yourself to see something as false, or see Joseph as behaving in something other than a prophet, then you see it everywhere, and it's infuriating because you realize how much of your life, your identity, and your mind and conscience you gave to Joseph and everything that came after him. And we want to wake up and open up the eyes of our family members and have all that happen. And I think probably every one of us that has gone through this process has stumbled and tripped and created wedges and difficulties in our family relationships in doing that. It's really hard to avoid, because these are the people that mean the most to us, and these are the people that we want to share this perspective with. And hopefully you have some that are patient enough with you that you can get through that, and then kind of just realize that those relationships that you have and the things that you can share together apart from Mormonism or the theology and doctrine of Mormonism are still of great worth to you, and they still love you. I think we have it easy in Mormonism. When you start talking to former Jehovah's Witnesses and former Scientologists, the degree of shunning that they have there is just tremendous, where you have a young couple decides to leave and they have kids, and a decade will go by and the kids will never see their grandparents because there's such a strong message of shunning. And so I think
you never appreciate that quite as much, except when you're like, oh my gosh, I heard about that on my mission, and I was like, well, they're crazy. Yeah. But then you think, and you're like, oh, I'm fortunate that that this group isn't as bad as that group, as far as I can tell. We have buttloads of problems, but oh my gosh, I'm so glad I'm not Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah. Well, I would just say, try to make sure that you're having a lot of good interactions with your family members that doesn't have anything to do with the church. It's really hard to stay quiet about some of the things, and just try to have.
Right, I know.
Yeah. I will never tell anyone to stifle their conscience, to not speak up when they see that there's an injustice. And I think I've probably had more success with my family members when I'm able to talk about a moral issue that is not really based on any historical gotcha or anything like that. But
what's an example? What do you have an example? I'm curious.
Oh, yeah.
An example of something that.
So I made the mistake of going to church with my brother, and the lesson was on. I got in trouble with this, but the lesson happened to be on the story in the Old Testament where I forget which prophet it was, said, "Go and kill all of them, and leave all the goods and sacrifice." And they came back and they said, "Well, we saved all this stuff because it's good stuff." And the prophet got mad at them and said, no, you have to go and you have to kill everybody, all the men, women, and children, except for the young girls. You can keep them as sex slaves. And I'm paraphrasing, but this is, it's in the Bible. Right. I think it's like the Midians or whatever. And so the moral of the lesson, like literally the Sunday school lesson was, see, God values obedience more than sacrifice. And so I raised my hand. I'm like, well, hold on a second. So if a man claiming to speak for God tells you to commit genocide, I would say that right. is proof positive that he doesn't actually speak for God. Like if we are going to develop into moral beings, we have to be able to tell the difference between something that would originate from a loving God and something that doesn't. And this just started a interesting debate where people started telling me that it's okay for God to commit genocide because the flood killed everybody on the earth. The bishop's wife stood up and said that the spirit has left the room, and it was just it created a lot of problem, and it spilled over into priesthood because this lesson was on the same thing. And somebody said that I brought up the subject of blind obedience and how that's not good. And somebody raised their hand and they said, well, actually, if we can get to the point where we have blind obedience, where we will do what the prophet says, no matter what it is, no matter what our opinion is, that is, the pinnacle of what we can do. And I'm just like flabbergasted, because that is how.
Yeah, but.
So anyway, these things, I wasn't arguing with my brother who was sitting next to me. I was.
No, but what's cool about that is there's no doubt going to be a bunch of other people in the audience that are going to be agreeing with you. They're going to say, no, this of course is crazy. But if I'm going to, I think you're smart to say that, because I do often try to go for the gotchas because they're just so freaking easy to see. Like, come now, you can see this. This is so plain. Yeah. Like, it's so easy. But they instantly defend. But if you do it this way instead, I think you're right. There's a wider path for common ground, so they might be more open.
Yeah, just be careful, because I found myself, unfortunately, cornering one of my family members into defending slavery because a prophet had justified it at some point. And I just had to say, okay, I just want to stop and pull back and say, you realize that you're defending the idea of slavery, because my position is that there is no moral justification ever that would condone one human owning the license to the life of another human in the form of slavery. And so all of the different justifications that you may be thinking of in order to defend the notion that a prophet can speak for God are absolutely immoral. And so it's one of those things where if you Google street epistemology, then I think they have a really healthy way of looking at it. And that's where you don't challenge beliefs. You don't say, look, here's this gotcha thing. What you do is you just ask people to articulate why they believe something. What is it that went into your thought process for why you accept this as true? And then you can then challenge not their beliefs, but look and examine the process by which they got to their belief and compare and contrast. And you may not have success with that.
Is there still a place then, potentially, like with your siblings or whoever with slavery, that you can, that's what you're doing. You're helping them connect the dots and follow it out to a logical conclusion. Yeah. Say, look here, like you are aware you are saying this, like, and you're comfortable with that. Is that kind of what you think, or did this place not even let you do that?
Yeah, no, I think you have to do that very carefully, because none of us, myself included, like to be proven wrong or like to be made out to be the bad guy. And so there are going to be times when you're talking with people where you really want to go, ha, gotcha. You changed your mind, or you did this, or you did that. And that really makes an enemy more than a friend. And so it's more helpful to just say, I hear you, I see what you're saying. I look at the issue and I see some problems with it. And this is why I see some problems with it. But I can understand how you got to where you are. I just disagree. And I think if you take away the pressure or the need to win an argument and just realize that each of these discussions is really just us learning from each other. And if you have an opportunity to have them see some of how you've gotten to your position, then that may or may not affect them in the future when they consider these things in an environment or by themselves where they're not threatened of losing face or of feeling shamed or anything like that, or they're not threatened of being wrong if they can come onto it. And then the next time you talk with them, you may find that they've readjusted their position. I think I've had that happen in some instances with some of my close associates, where I'll talk to them about something at one position, and then months or years later, we'll have another discussion and we'll see that it's changed. Fortunately, unfortunately, in some instances, that just reflects what the brethren are now saying about things like, for example, for the LGBT people. And so you're seeing that they're still following the pattern of just, what's right or what's wrong. Let me see what the brethren say. Okay, yep, I can love my gay brother or sister now because the brethren said it's okay.
Right.
So,
oh gosh.
My heart goes out to you. It's a tough situation to be in. I would just say, let go of the need to be right. Let go of the need to raise every single issue. If there are things that are important to you, then try to do it in a way that more conveys how you feel on moral grounds. And if they're ready, or if they ask you, or if they want to know about, hey, I heard about polyandry. Like, what do you know about it? They, in all likelihood, are starting to realize that you in your study know a lot and may want to at least get some starting points from you. And if those opportunities come up, then certainly do that gently and don't go out of your way to make them feel bad. Now I'm saying all these things and my family's going to be like, I watched your show and you did none of that stuff. You keep throwing this stuff in my face. So if that's the case, they can call in and they can call me out.
That's right. Well, I think that I do. I mean, regardless if you practice or not, I do think that's really good advice. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for the call.
Awesome. Okay, cool. See you.
All right. Okay, let's see here. Any comments? When Pig Fly says the prophets are true believers, they always say, I believe I'll put this money in my bank account. Very, very funny. All right. You know, what I think would be awesome is if like Kwaku L or some of the other Saints Unscripted people decided to call in. I think we could have a fun discussion. I don't know if it's going to happen, but we'll see. All right, let's go to banners, then we'll go to that, and we will answer this call. Hello, you're at Talk on Things and Stuff.
Hi, Jonathan. Hey, thanks. You know, something that drove me crazy, listening to Dallin Oaks speak at the B1 worldwide celebration 2 years ago.
Yeah.
He said something because, you know, I was in the church when they made the change in 1978. It's about 12.
Okay.
And he said in the speech, and I immediately said, that is a lie. He said that the church promptly and publicly disavowed the previous explanations for the ban.
Yeah.
Now, I was in seminary in the 80s, went on a mission.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, very active, BYU. It's an absolute lie that they publicly disavowed promptly those things until Randy Bott got in trouble as a BYU professor over a decade later.
Over a decade.
I mean,
Let's see, 78. And then Randy Bott got in trouble in Romney's campaign in 2012. So that was like several decades later. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just can't believe that people aren't talking about this outright lie. They never publicly disavowed it, certainly not promptly, until 2012. I mean, it's crazy. Do a video about that lie. I mean, this is...
I did a couple of videos about the B1 celebration, and I think some other people have pointed out what you're talking about, and we're seeing the repercussions of the Brethren's persistence in not making as strong a disavowals and as strong an acknowledgement of their prior errors as they could. And so we see things like what is, recently been published in the Come Follow Me manuals, just completely resetting the timetable on people believing that the church has actually made any meaningful change. And you're absolutely right. The statements of Dallin Oaks in the B1 celebration were absolutely the sort of lawyerly, weaselly language meant to paint the church in a light that it just did not inhabit. In addition to the lie that you talked about in terms of the church immediately, promptly disavowing those past things, he led people to believe that the ban itself was just the result of mistakes being made in the past because of the racism that was prevalent in the culture. And he didn't actually, though. He did it in a way that sounds like it, but what he said is that the reasons that were given for the ban were things that were just born from men guessing as to God's the reasons for God's commandment. But in doing that, he actually affirmed that the ban itself was God's commandment, and the ban itself is inherently racist.
Yeah, I read that again. He said that while he didn't have a testimony of the reasons, he came to learn or came to realize that God rarely gives a reason for his commandments. Well, that clearly, in a weaselly way, he was saying this was a commandment from God.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, if you call him out on that, he'll say, well, I didn't say those words, but you certainly implied it by saying, in this context, that God didn't give a reason for it.
Yeah,
for
and
his directions and commandments to his prophets.
and he's consistent. You can find a newspaper article from the early '80s when Oakes was first called to be an apostle, and they interview him and they ask him about that. I think at like the 20-year anniversary or something, and he makes essentially the same statement that that we don't always know the reasons for God's commands, but in the same, I think it's the same article, he also makes the statement when they talk about, well, it was a policy, it wasn't doctrine or a commandment. And he's like, well, in a church that claims divine revelation, I don't know that you can really draw a line and separate policy from doctrine. And that was frank honesty back then that I don't know that the church would want to have as their call sign now, but because the distinction between policy and doctrine is a warm blanket of deniability that the church has been able to use for things like the LGBT issue and the race issue in the past. So, very good comments. I agree absolutely that the B1 celebration was a problem. And I've heard from members who were believing members struggling with that issue, and they saw the B1 celebration, and it was the straw that broke the camel's back. And they saw that. Wow. If you check out the YouTube channel for Thinker of Thoughts, there's a video I did kind of looking at people that are familiar with kind of the stuff that happened around that time. There was an apology, a satire apology piece that I put out that was mistaken for being real, and I got a lot of criticism for it. And in the process of that criticism, some of the loudest voices that were critical of that satire piece, the apology, did make some honest statements about how they felt about the issue of race. And one of the things that they said is that the brethren, in the upcoming B1 celebration, because it was a few weeks before, had better not, lay the priesthood ban at the foot of God and say that God did it, because that I can't be in a church where you claim that God himself called for this priesthood ban. And if you watch that same channel and see some of those same voices after the B1 celebration, then it's kind of like you're waiting to see, well, how did they respond to what Oakes said? And the way that they interpreted Oakes's comments was, it was hard to understand at first, but essentially they were saying that the thing that Oakes was actually saying he didn't know the reasons for the commandment was the command to lift the ban, not the command to put it in the first place. And so that gave them room to, I think, be charitable to Oakes's statement and to still kind of hold the reverence that they do for the brethren. And I think, as humans, we want, when there's things that we hold as higher values, we try to do everything we can to maintain those higher values. And if one of those higher values is your reverence for the brethren of the church, then it's not surprising that you would look for every way possible to make space for them to be what they claim to be. So I understand that.
Well, Elder Stevenson this week in the news said that he was saddened by what they had put in the manual.
Yeah.
By, in error. Again, he, in that whole text that he carefully wrote and read, there was not the word I apologize.
No, it was the same mealy-mouthed sort of non-apology that we get for the Mountain Meadows, for the issue of racism, for anything. They'll do anything that they can not to apologize. And I don't know if that's because Dallin H. Oakes, has decreed that the word apology is never seen in the scriptures, and so the church doesn't have to do it. But, there's a lot of different words that aren't in the church, that aren't in the scriptures, that the church tends to be involved in. So I just see that as a really poor exegesis of the Bible or scriptures or whatever. So hopefully the church will learn from that in the future, so that it can be a healthier place for those of our loved ones that still find themselves there.
I hope so. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Okay. Oh, yes. So my son and I watched this movie called Midsommar. And it was disturbing. I'm still reeling from it. But if you get a chance to watch it, I've been mulling it over and thinking it, because a lot of times things that I'll encounter or see will inspire videos in the future. I'm just going to mute this real quick. So the thing about Midsommar, though, is they go and they're involved in this ritual that's secret, that they don't know what the entirety of the ritual is. They don't know what they're signing up for, what they're agreeing for. They don't know what the intent and purpose of the ritual is when they initially start and become it and start participating in this celebration. And it just reminds me so much of our relationship with the church when we go to the temple. And you don't know what is actually entailed in the temple ceremony, but at the beginning of it, they get your consent. They say, if any of you don't want to participate, you can raise your hand or stand up and leave now. And so since you didn't do that, then the presumption is that you've consented to whatever is going to happen in the temple ceremony itself. And it's just kind of one of these, you'll start to see parallels in different media and different stories and experiences that really kind of give a visceral punch to some of the things that you experienced as a Mormon when you leave the church. And that was one for me. But I would just, if you have a squeamish heart, don't watch that movie. It's terrible. All right. Let's see. I missed a call. All right. Let's see. I'll read some comments. Paleo Dust says the official policy is to never apologize for anything, and that really is the official policy. We have Dallin H. Oaks on film making that argument. All right, we got another call. Hello, you're on Talk on Things and Stuff.
Yeah, hi. This is Richard again. I'm calling from earlier. I'm the Never Mormon member.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Richard.
Yeah. So my other question is, I guess, you've often heard, what's good about Mormonism isn't unique and what's unique isn't good. But I guess if Mormonism was so good, why is it that 50% of all or 75% of all new converts are inactive within a year? Why is it that they're dealing with 50% of all missionaries that are going out and returning home early? The church certainly isn't growing. And do you think that it's simply because the church has been caught in a lie? I mean, what would you place these things on? Because again, I can look at the history of the church and say, okay, look, it's plainly obvious that people from Israel didn't come to the Americas 2,000 years ago. But even if that were the truth, even if all of the history was true, it still seems that Mormonism isn't scratching most people's itch when 75% of all new converts are inactive within a year.
Yeah. Well, what?
So I'll let you expound on that, but.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think the idea that Mormonism has a great deal of goodness is not something that you're hearing from the critics of the church. It's not something you're hearing from people for whom Mormonism did not give them the benefits that it claims to give. It's what you're going to hear from those who set the culture and set the tone, from the leaders. And Mormonism is very much a gospel that is shaped, or a culture that is shaped by prosperity gospel. It's shaped by the notion that that there were great and noble souls, and those are the ones that will end up leading the church by preordination, or it's not quite predestination, but preordination. So all of those things, theology affects culture in a religion. Mm-hmm. So if you go and you speak to somebody who used to be a Church of Christ scientist, their theology is that sickness is disease, spiritual disease. And so you can, part of the healing arts in that religion is meant where you're using spiritual remedies for physical ailments. And you're denying physical ailments because those ailments then they give. Right.
I had somebody who was part of that religion, a grandfather who passed away, mm-hmm. and spoke with a raspy voice because he had a tumor on his larynx for his entire life.
Yeah.
So and obviously
that theology affects
thoughts and prayers didn't do anything.
Yeah, but the theology affects the culture because then within that culture, they tend to be in denial about physical ailments, and people won't go to the doctor when they need to because it affects how they want to see themselves and how they want to project themselves to others. And in Mormonism, because of the prosperity gospel message, because of this idea that you want to project a good image to the world so that they see the church in the right way, then you're going to tell people as a member, even if you're not a leader, that it does so much for you. And you tend to diminish or deny the things that don't work and give lip service to what is supposed to be. And that ends up really creating almost kind of a dual personality in the lives of a lot of people, where you have all of these hidden problems that you don't get help for, that you don't open up to other people for, that you can't show. And so that's why I think the rest of the world sees Mormons as like these clean-cut people that have it together. You know, there's a whole lot of influential mommy bloggers on Pinterest and all these other things that are Mormon because we're really good at putting up a good show. And it seems like it's doing a great deal.
Facade, yeah. I mean, it's like building a beautiful temple, but realizing that there's really nothing going on in there that is benefiting humanity.
Yeah. What is your background? If you are never Mormon, how did you get connected to it?
Yeah, no, I grew up in a city that had, a large Mormon contingent. All my friends were Mormon. My brother eventually joined the church at about age 17, so before my parents allowed him to, and, told me before he left on his mission, hey, I'll be married within 6 months of coming home from my mission. I'm like, hey, you don't even have a girlfriend, but, sounds like a noble plan. And, and now I watched him, he's rose through the ranks and, became a stake president, but in the process of, obviously paying tithing, he didn't pay his mortgage for 2.5 years and lost his house. And did that as a stake president while, probably telling other people how to live their lives.
Yeah.
But, like I said, it strikes me as that even if everything about the history of Mormonism was, able to be proven true, there's still a cancer within the church that seems that the obedience and the necessity to, I don't know how to, I've watched the church for, extensively for over a decade, and I can't wrap my head around what it is. Is it that the people are so church broke that they've devoted everything that they have to it, and for them to, at this point say, I was wrong? Do you think that that's the strongest motivating factor?
Is not wanting to admit that they're wrong?
Yeah, and them wanting to double down on
I don't know. I think
sort of the confirmation bias that they need in order to stay within it.
I think one of the things that you gain from studying other groups that use a lot of the psychological manipulation, the group psychology influences, is that you see the things that do appeal to people and do bring them in. And Mormonism, I consider it kind of like a really, really effective virus. Like it's gentle when it needs to be gentle. There are still some dark corners in it, but it does generally really good at the beginning of making people feel welcome, of making them feel needed by giving them callings, by having them do service, even if it's cleaning the toilets. Those are ways that people feel needed, and that feeling of being needed gives people purpose. And so there are real reasons that people find value in membership of the church. And frankly, those reasons are very human reasons. And even when you leave Mormonism, if that's what you decide to do, you still have those needs. You still want to feel like you are needed because that's something that does give you purpose. And Mormonism does a good job at that. And all of the different things that you talk about in terms of going on a mission, participating in the church, all of those really feed into that. And so the people that
but
do
I guess
fall...
I guess my question really is like, then how come 75% of the people that have recently joined the church feel like they were sold a bill of goods and very soon fall away?
Yeah, well, that's where the internet age and the ability of people to learn things that were previously hidden. I think you mentioned Sandra Tanner in your first call, and it's very true that when...
No, but that was someone else.
Okay, when the Tanners started, Like if you wanted to get access to any of that information, you had to dig through old dusty libraries, and it was just not there. And now it's at a click of a link, and then you have people creating videos and other content that make it even more accessible.
But again, even if we're talking about all of the history being correct, there's something inherently cancerous about it when 75% of the new members are choosing not to continue on with that which they sought. You know what I mean? They personally came to the belief that this was the right church for them. They were baptized, and then so is it simply that these members, the new members, feel like they were lied to by the missionaries, and they eventually find the real, or do you think that there's just a general cancer within the church that it's just not a happy place for 3/4 of the people who join it?
I think it may be all of the above. I think that there are certainly going to be people that it works for and people that it doesn't. And the things like the CES letter are having.
Yes, I guess my question is: do you think it's just simply a result of a high pressure, high demand sales force out there, making people members, and then once you actually get into the church, it's like, hey, we loved you while we were trying to get you to be a member, but now, hey, thanks for being a member. You owe us 10% of your money, and here's all these callings, and you might have to come clean the church this weekend.
Yeah. No, I think that's another dimension of it, is all the different prescriptions that the church gives you for how to deal with the troubles in your life. People will start to realize that it doesn't help. And on top of that, the toxic perfectionism that is part of the culture of the church is something that if you're not in the church before, and then suddenly you're surrounded by all these people who are putting up the facade that now you feel like you have to catch up because you're not seeing everybody's dirt. You're only seeing the facade of cleanliness, and you then are holding yourself to that standard. And I think, as particularly if you are, any degree of maturity, and then you join the church, that is going to really start to create problems. And when the church's prescription for you is just to pray more or to do more and be more, then that's not going to work. And I'm pretty sure the brethren are struggling with some of those statistics that you've mentioned, and they're asking themselves the same question. And so we're starting to see changes that are coming about, I think, aimed at addressing what you're talking about, whether it's 2-hour church or changing the curriculum. And I think it's a difficult battle for the leaders to face, but we'll see how it goes. I appreciate your call. Let's see if we can get at least one more call.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
No problem. Take care. All right. All right, I think we'll do one more call. We have a question from a young man that I'm familiar with. Do you think that missions for young people have met positive effects? Discipline, structure, experiences, developing verbal skills? Is it better than just sitting at home? I think that there are positive things that you can get, whether it's learning a second language or discipline or anything like that. The problem is that it is a controlling environment that basically breaks you down and gives you the mindset of subordination to authority, and that's just not something that I think is a good trade-off. There's an episode of Rick and Morty where you can see Summer go through and change in a way that is incompatible with who she is. And I really like that episode because it shows you that even if your loved one is involved with a group that seems to transform them into something that you see as ideal, if it takes away their individuality and it takes away their ability and their freedom to think for themselves, then that's not a good trade-off. So, again, recommend, it's the Get Schwifty episode of Rick and Morty. All right. I think we'll make this the last call. Hello? I think I accidentally hung up. Hello? You're on Talk on Things and Stuff.
Oh, hi, this is Jenny.
Hi.
I must not be up to date with the live feed.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a delay.
Okay, hi, my name is Jenny. Longtime member, no longer, only one of my many siblings that is out and has my name out. Family's very proud of their Mormon history from the beginning. There was a gentleman who called earlier. I just thought I'd pop in. He was asking about how to deal with family, and I was just going to revert to him and say it's pointless to try to do that in my experience. that just makes them dig their heels in deeper. But if they do have questions, I'll give short answers and then just let them know, don't take my word for it. Here's where you can find some information. Usually give them the church links first, since they're usually afraid to look anywhere else. And if they do find something out, they're really afraid to leave because they believe they've made these covenants that, if it's true, then now I'm in big trouble. But anyway, I was just watching the LDS seer stone video, and I don't know if you've done a video on that, but that's a big subject that I've brought up sometimes with old childhood friends who are still members, and I've had people say to me, "Oh, that's not true. That
really?
didn't happen."
As recently as this year, like I think it was 2015 or something like that, where they published the pictures of the seer stone.
Yeah, well, not everybody looks at the church publications, and this is a friend she's not super active, but she still believes. And so she said, well, that's not true. That's not what we ever learned, and I'm not real active right now, but I always thought I would go back. But I didn't know if you'd ever done like a breakdown of that video.
I don't think, is this the one that's kind of cartoonish?
No,
it's like a little cartoon?
It's on the church website. It's called Seer Stones, and the translation, it's Mason Allred and Mark McGee.
Is this the one where they have a young man like asking questions that seem to be very staged?
Yeah, and it's really creepy.
Yes, it is. I haven't broken that video down, but it would be a good one to do because it is creepy.
To see it. And then I always have to wonder, it's like, if I was still like fully believing and entrenched in this
would
mindset,
I buy it?
Would I still think it was creepy, or would I be like, oh, of course, yeah, like what they say in the video, this is an idea we can get used to.
Yeah. I don't know. That's, blatant inoculation, and I don't know if inoculation has the staying power that they hope that it has. I think, we got a bunch of young people that are raised on Disney movies and other movies that really teach strongly the idea of questioning authority. And I think that mindset is going to start to affect, I know it affected me. The Matrix was a big influence on me, and just in terms of seeing the parallels with Plato's allegory of the cave and how people's perceptions can be reframed. I think that that video in particular, when I watched it, I remember thinking, if I was a member, I would just be cringing looking at this video.
It was so awkward.
Yeah. I don't know. That's a good reminder, though, because there comes a point where there's just so much crap that the church puts out that you would need to dissect, that you can't have a life otherwise if you don't do it. And so
I sent it to a friend, and she hasn't watched it yet, and I think she was maybe afraid to watch it, and I said, hey, have you watched that video yet? And she said, oh, no, haven't had time yet. And I said, well, it's from the church website, so you could even go on the church website and look up, and that's what you'd find, so you don't have to be afraid of it. I'd love to know what you think.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me, one of the earlier callers asked about, the church, the apostles know about all this historical stuff, and we actually have an audio recording in 1978. Wesley Walters and a young man went and visited the president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles and asked him a number of questions about the revelation lifting the ban on the priesthood for black people. But they also asked him, do you guys have Joseph Smith's seer stone? And the president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles says, no, we don't have that. I've never seen it. And so I think there are instances where even the apostles themselves are in the dark about some stuff, and it may be that the seer stones and the folk magic history of Joseph Smith in the very, very early church is something that even some of the higher leaders of the church had hidden from them until the church was forced into transparency, and now they've tried to create a framework that seems normal, but I don't think it's
Joseph Fielding Smith's safe.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you for the advice to our earlier caller. I think it's a good idea to be very reserved in how you go about challenging your family members on that. I probably
definitely, and always let them know. Don't take my word for it. Look it up.
Yeah, and at the same token, also let them know that just because I have a different view of the church does not mean that I love you less or that I value my childhood less. Like one of the heartbreaking things I think for me early on was when I started to be vocal about my criticism of Mormon culture, even things like the interviews for the youth for personal worthiness, I think my mother felt like what I was doing was saying that she was a bad mother for raising me in the church, and that hurt her. And so that was a springboard for a lot of, to me, were very meaningful conversations about what the nature of my perspective on the church is, and the fact that I still love her and I still love my childhood. There are things that I wish had been different, but I did the best that I could with what I had, and just like anyone does in any family situation. And I don't have a great deal of resentment for it. There's still many beautiful things that I enjoy about my childhood. They're not things that are, that you could only get in the church, but the church happened to be the vehicle for them. And there are also a lot of things that I regret.
Go ahead. I regret telling my daughter all of the disturbing things that I found out, because she just did not want to hear any of it, and so she's really still, all in 100%.
Yeah.
But
double down.
Definitely what you're saying with your mom. I think when you're just totally real, I didn't want to tell her for a long time. I didn't tell her anything. I still didn't tell her. I took my name off the records because I thought it would only make her feel bad. But I did tell her my feelings about the gospel and why. And when you really lay down and how like just pulled the rug out and broke your heart, and you start with I saw this article on the cover of Newsweek about church confirms Joseph Smith had 40 wives, and so that started me looking and bawled my eyes out to her and told her this is why I'm not part of this anymore. And she said she had some of those same concerns too, but they just but I just have to have faith that and always that same mantra, well, God doesn't choose perfect people to be his prophets. So there's really not much we can do for those family members that are so deep.
Yeah, I hear frequently people say, just be as loving and kind and good to your family as you can be on your own terms, and if nothing else, that would be more powerful than letting them see that when you're apostate, you're not suddenly in the grips of Satan. But half the time they're just going to say that your happiness isn't real happiness anyway, it's just fake happiness. So thanks for the call, and I think we're going to wrap it up now. I want to try to keep these not more than an hour or so. Let's see, any other comments we want to close out with?
All right, thanks so much for the time.
Anytime, call again next time we do it. It's great to hear from you.
All right.
Thanks, take care. Jonathan. All right, I think we are done. I'm going to go ahead and close things out. I appreciate anyone that called and everyone that stayed and hung around for the entire show, and we'll see if we can do this with some degree of regularity. So with that, I will say goodbye.